Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Now again we are continuing with the past paper batch in which we're discussing different past papers. So this will be discussion of the section B and C of the November 21 paper 2-1. Now starting with question number 6, this is section B, you have to answer both the questions. So please remember you don't leave out. Some of you make this mistake of leaving out one of these questions. No, you have to answer both the questions. So you'll have to answer 6 and 7. So this is 6, this is 7th, and then section C. You have to answer either 8 or 9. And you should be very careful. You have to remember doing both the questions is not good. If you know one of them better than the other, only then try to attempt them. So this is the only choice you have, either question 8 or question 9. Now, as we look at question number 6a, explain the lock and key hypothesis of enzyme action using a named example. So when a named example, there has to be 1 mark for that. So there are 5 marks for this. So always think of 4 mark scheme points. How would you come up with 4 points? And with this, 1 mark will be for the named example. Then explain using examples why proteins are essential for all living organisms. So using examples, why are proteins essential? Why? Because we need enzymes. Why do we need enzymes? We need the enzyme salivary amylase. In the salivary glands, that enzyme is produced. So it's going to digest starch. Or you can say about the stomach, pepsin is digested. So everybody can get this 10 out of 10 because you have to remember that you have to write a lot. If you write a lot, and if the 4 points or the 5 points which are required by the mark scheme are cut there, even though you have written 3 or 4 irrelevant, I'm not saying wrong, I'm saying irrelevant. Like you can say enzymes are very good. Well, that doesn't make any sense. Enzymes are very good, yes. Without enzymes, people would die. Well, that's irrelevant. Or enzymes are required in biology, or enzymes are required by all organisms. So what do you mean by all that? That's a very general statement. So that's irrelevant, but there is no negative marking. But if you have given me the 5 correct points, well, then I'm going to give you your 5 marks. So please understand this, and now I'm going to go through the mark scheme with you and discuss it with you in a little more detail. Looking at the mark scheme, I mean, there are a whole lot of points for it. The only 5 marks which you had to give. So if you said, okay, we've given one enzyme amylase, well, that comes to my mind immediately. You can have talked of pepsin, you can talk of trypsin, you can talk of ripsin, any other which you know very well. So what is it going to do? It's going to convert starch to maltose, right? Starch to maltose. Now, why are enzymes so important? Is why? Because enzymes have an active site. So this is the active site of an enzyme. Active site, please remember, not side. Active site, S-I-T-E, active site. Then they're specific. Why are they specific? Because this depression, which is the active site, I also call it the khadda. But of course, in Urdu, many of you don't want to understand Urdu. So specificity of the enzyme, meaning, and what does this AW mean? AW means alternative words. If you said enzymes would only work on one substrate, well, that means it is specific. Specific means why? Because only the enzyme which has this depression, then something which is complementary to it is going to fit into this, which is the substrate. So substrate fits into active site, and what do we get? We get an enzyme substrate complex formed. And then if you name the product, like you said, maltose formed, so then you would get a mark for that. And at the end of the day, the enzyme remains unchanged. Enzyme does not take part or does not get degraded or does not get broken down or does not change its shape of the active site. So the enzyme remains unchanged at the end of the reaction. Now, all these things you knew, but when you started to write it, you gave me very wrong general statements like enzymes are good, enzymes are essential, enzymes chapter is very important, and all that, which is nothing but a lot of BS, which is beautiful story, not something else which you thought. Then coming to the B part of the question, why are enzymes important? Why were enzymes said required? So number one, we needed it for growth and we needed it for repair. So if you just said enzymes or proteins, sorry, it was one more on proteins, proteins needed for growth and repair, well, you get 2 marks in one sentence. Then they also can provide energy, like people go on a protein diet, which is called the Atkins diet, in which they get energy, they live, they lose weight, because then the energy is released by breaking down the protein molecule. And why they're required for muscles, they're required for the skin or the nails or the hair. Then we need them for hormones, like a hormone insulin. Please remember, estrogen, progesterone are hormones, but they're not protein hormones. They are fat hormones. So they're needed for enzymes, then we need them for antibodies, then we need them, let's name a protein, so we can say hemoglobin or fibrinogen. Then they're required in carrier proteins in the cell membrane. You remember active transport is because there is a channel protein required, which is going to pump out things from a low concentration to a high concentration and requires ATP, or you can say requires energy. And then, of course, we need the proteins for blood clotting. So all these examples were ones which you could have said why the body seems to need proteins and why we cannot live without proteins in our diet and what they're needed for in the body. Then coming to question number 7, which you also had to do, A part, explain the role of the nucleus and cell division in the inheritance of characteristics from parent to offspring. So role of the nucleus and cell division in the inheritance of characteristics from parent to offspring. Then if people are exposed to ionizing radiation, this may affect the inheritance of characteristics by their children. Suggest how this exposure to radiation may affect inheritance. Naturally, this is all about mutation, and that mutation would have to be in the gametes, and when the gametes fuse, will form a zygote. That zygote results in a human being. So all that, which I am just going to explain to you. Now, question 7 was role of the nucleus and cell division in the inheritance of characteristics from parent to offspring. So you have to realize is you had to correlate all this. It wasn't just normal cell division, which is mitosis. If they'd asked you a question like what is the role of cell division in growth, then you would talk of mitosis. But here you're going to talk of meiosis. So number one, first of all, we said, okay, chromosomes. So where are the chromosomes present? They're present in the nucleus. And what are the chromosomes made up of? They're made up of DNA or genetic material. And what do they contain on it? They contain genes on it. So there is the gene for blood group. So there is the gene for blood group. Then this could be IA and this could be IO. So alleles, genes or alleles. Alleles are the alternative form of a gene. Then what do they code for? They code for proteins. Yes, every gene codes for one specific protein. Like there'd be a gene for amylase, there'd be a gene for pepsin. And the proteins will determine your characteristics. The fact that you have green eyes, the fact that you have brown hair or you have jet black hair is all because of the proteins made which result in the deposition of that pigment, either your skin color. That is also dependent on proteins. Now, but they haven't asked you that. They said inheritance parent to offspring. So what will happen now? The parents, there has to be a male parent and a female parent. So in the testes of the male parent, there'll be meiosis or reduction division and sperms will be produced. In the female, the ovum will be produced by meiosis. So meiosis or meiotic division. Then another word for this is reduction division. So if you said meiosis, you got another mark. If you said reduction division, you got another mark. And then when these gametes are formed, the sperm and the ovum will fuse to form one cell, the zygote. So fertilization and then the combination, this will be a mix of the genetic material or the chromosomes or the DNA. And now this one cell, the zygote, is the diploid, which is going to result in a human being being formed from this one cell, the zygote. So this was 7a, which I've explained to you. And this is how you would have worded it or written it. Even if you just gave it to me in points, that's fine. You don't have to write proper sentences. I'm not checking your English language skills. I'm just checking your biology skills. Then coming to the B part, the question was now the question is different. Now the question says, if people are exposed to ionizing radiation, this may affect the inheritance of characteristics by their children. Suggest how the exposure to radiation may affect. So now this is a totally different thing. So we are going to sort of talk about the exposure to radiation. Now exposure to radiation, if God forbid that happens, that's why women when they are pregnant are not x-rayed, because that is being exposed to radiation. So we do an ultrasound instead. So increases the chances of mutation. So if a woman is exposed to radiation, then it increases the chances to mutation. So this could result in change in the chromosome number. Maybe the gametes which she makes will be faulty, or the man is exposed to, then the fault will be in the sperm. So change in the chromosome number or change in the gene structure. The gene for hemoglobin is faulty, so the child is going to develop sickle cell anemia. Then codes for a different protein, so the hemoglobin is faulty, may result in a new beneficial variation. Yes, it could also result in something which could be good. or may result in a genetic disease, or if you gave an example of a genetic disease like sickle cell anemia, well, then you got a mark for that. So, sickle cell anemia, or if you said the person has Down syndrome because he has an additional chromosome, the chromosome number changes, but that is also due to a mutation. So, when a person is exposed to radiation, there are more chances of mutations arising. So these were 4 marks, and if you wrote all this for me, I'm sure you would get your 4 out of 4. So even if some of the things which you wrote were not very relevant, but still you would get so. So these are questions in which you can get easily your 10 out of 10. Now coming to the C part, question 8, water enters living organisms and is transported to all their cells. Compare the transport of water in a human and a flowering plant. Now that's very interesting. Is that it's not saying to compare the use or the function of water. It says compare the transport of water. In a human being, how is water transported, and in a flowering plant, how is water transported? So it's not asking the use of water or what are the benefits of water in humans, so it is the transport of water in a human and in a flowering plant. Then B part, water in humans and flowering plants contain dissolved mineral ions. Suggest reasons why the mineral ion requirements of humans and plants are different. Well, humans need iron. Why does it need iron? Iron is needed for hemoglobin. Why? Because humans need to transport oxygen through their body, while plants need magnesium. Why does it need magnesium? Because it needs for chlorophyll. Why does it need chlorophyll? Because it can photosynthesize. So see how it was a different question and a different way of handling the question. Mineral ions and the requirements of humans and plants. Look at the mark scheme. Question is transport of water in living organisms, and you have to compare human and flowering plant. So human, plants, and humans, this is the differences. But what was this? When it says compare, then you have to do similarities and differences. So you have to do similarities and you have to do differences. So now the similarities were both, in both the cases water is transferred in tubes, transported in tubes, and it's a one-way movement from the soil to the leaves, or in human beings in the arteries and the veins, it's a one-way movement, and both travel between cells by osmosis. So water travels from cell to cell by osmosis, whether it's a human being or whether it's a plant. It is water travels by osmosis. So if it's a human cell, cell A to cell B is by osmosis. If it is a plant cell, cell A to cell B is by osmosis. So both travel by osmosis. So similarities where both are carried in tubes is a one-way movement, and both travel between cells by osmosis. Please remember, between cells by osmosis. So both travel between cells by osmosis. Then coming on to the differences, let's look at the differences. Now look at the plants. Now from the plants, it is from the soil in the xylem. Then you gave me a detail of the xylem. Xylem has lignin in it and there's no end wall, so it's a continuous channel. So you gave me that, you got another mark for that. Then why is it travel? Because of transpiration. Transpiration means the loss of water vapor from the leaves through the stomata. So if you gave me a detail of that mechanism, how it is going to travel and then how it is going to be lost through evaporation, and then it is going to travel up the column, a continuous column, by cohesion and adhesion forces. Cohesion is the hydrogen bonding between the water molecules, and adhesion is the bond that it makes with the wall of the xylem vessel. So if you wrote any of those things, you got a mark for that. But then you also had to give me something about the human. So you have to give me the comparison, but there are 4 separate marks for it. So you could have given it to me as a table, or you could have given it to me separately. In humans, of course, how do we get water? We got it by water by ingestion. Ingestion means either we drink water or we have an apple which contains 70% water. So, and then what happens is it enters the alimentary canal. And then, of course, it is absorbed and enters the blood vessels. So here is the blood vessels. This is this point. Then detail of the blood vessels. Blood vessels, it is carried in blood vessels, which can be arteries, and they have an elastic wall and they have a muscular wall. So there can be vasoconstriction and vasodilation. So the blood can be diverted to different parts of the body. And then, of course, we have a heart, which is going to pump this blood containing this water to all parts of the body. Then detail of the mechanism. Heart is a muscular organ. It has the ventricle wall is muscular, thick wall, so it can pump the blood into the aorta, and the aorta is going to carry it, and all the arteries arise from the aorta. so allows pulsing of blood. And then, of course, where is it lost? It is lost through sweating and urination, and in the feces, and in exhaled air. So it is lost. How is it lost? How is it gained? And how is it transported? So these were the points that you had to give me for part A of the question. Then coming to part B. Now, it said in part B, it said, of course, what water in humans and flowering plants contain dissolved mineral ions. Suggest reasons why mineral ion requirement of humans and plants are different. So, mineral requirement: magnesium for chlorophyll, iron for the hemoglobin, calcium for the bones, and calcium for the cell walls in plants. Deficiency in plants used to yellow leaves. Why? Because then there is deficiency of magnesium, so less chlorophyll, the leaves become yellow. Then deficiency in animals, your calcium deficiency in animals can result to rickets and anemia. If there's iron deficiency, that results in anemia. Then why? Because cell types are different. You see, the human physiology is different. Humans need hemoglobin to transport oxygen. Plants do not need hemoglobin. Plants need magnesium because magnesium is required for chlorophyll, and chlorophyll is needed for to absorb light, to trap light. So chlorophyll is needed to excite the electrons in the chlorophyll molecule. Of course, we'll study that in A levels. So different cell types, different physiology in the organism. Humans have a heart and they pump blood, and the oxygen is carried from the lungs into the blood and then to the different parts of the body. While in plants, we need magnesium and chlorophyll. So the fact that you said there was different physiology in the organisms, you got a mark for that. Then different chemicals in different proportions. You need calcium. Human beings need calcium for the bones, but plants need lesser calcium. They don't need a lot of calcium. We plants need magnesium. We don't need so much magnesium. We do need a little bit for other certain other chemicals. So produce different chemicals or chemicals required in different proportions. So this was the mark scheme for the B part of the question. Now coming to question number 9a, sperm cells and pollen grains are both involved in sexual reproduction. Compare the function of a sperm cell and a pollen grain and describe how the structure of each is related to its function. That's a little difficult question. Let's talk about this now. Suggest reasons why sexual reproduction may be better for the survival of a species than asexual reproduction. So, you know, asexual reproduction, why would that not? Because they're all genetically same. So if there is a disease and one is wiped out, all of them will be wiped out. So for a species to not become extinct, you need variation. So this was the last question, and you had to make a choice. So there was a choice whether you did the first one or you did this one. So you have to figure that out which one you know better. So I always tell you is that just write down a few points, and if you think you have enough points and you have 6 marking scheme points, well, fine. For this one, if you have, just write short 1 letter word and just one word here and see if you know 4 points for it, and then decide whether you want to do this one or you want to do the other one, and you make that choice. Now, whenever the word compare is given, you have to give me similarities and differences. So similarities, both are gametes, pollen grain and sperm, both are gametes, both have haploid number of chromosomes, both have been produced by meiosis, but that's the same mark scheme point. If you said haploid produced by my meiosis, same mark scheme point, and then fuses with the egg and fertilization and to produce a zygote, both of them. So these are the similarities between the sperm and the pollen grain. Then differences: sperm cells has a flagellum. There's no such thing in the pollen. Then enzymes which are there to actually help in penetration of the ovum. Then so pollen is either wind pollinated or insect pollinated, so you got to be a mark for that. Then they can be small and light and sticky, because if they are wind pollinated, then they'll be small and light. If they are insect pollinated, it will be sticky, or they have a sculptured coat so that the pollen can stick to the insect. Then pollen tube to reach the egg. Now, no such thing happens in the with the sperm. So in that we have a pollen tube. So that's what I always say: is just write a whole lot about it, whatever you know about it, and you probably get your 6 out of 6 in this. Then for the next part of the question, which was suggest reasons why sexual reproduction may be better for the survival of a species than asexual. Now, sexual reproduction results in genetically different offsprings. Like for instance, a red flower is crossed with a white flower, and we can have red flowers. A red is crossed with a white rose or any flower, and we can get red, and we can get white, and we can also get pink. because if there is codominant, then there is variation. So originally you had red and white flowers, now you have red, white, and pink flowers. Similarly, in the blood groups, we've discussed that in another video. So sexual reproduction, genetically different offspring. Sexual reproduction results in variation. Then asexual reproduction, they're all genetically identical, or the word that is being used is they're all clones. Like you do asexual reproduction of sugarcane, or you do asexual reproduction of potato. So you just take a potato and you cut it up into pieces and you plant the potato, and the plant grows, and then the new potatoes will be exactly identical to the original potato. And that's, of course, a commercial use of that. And as I tell you the story of how KFC came into Pakistan and then gave the potatoes to the farmers so that they could plant it, and then the KFC would buy back all the potatoes because they want all the fries to taste the same in every KFC shop. So reference to, of course, is mitosis. Asexual reproduction is totally mitosis. Sexual is meiosis. Then conditions that affect survival: disease, temperature, water availability. So if it was a variation, then maybe the pink flowers died, but the white and the red survived. But if they were all red, then if one red flower died, then all of the red ones died because they were all produced by asexual reproduction. So some individuals will survive in a changing environment, and they can live in a wide range of environments. Why? Because they're red flowers and white flowers and pink flowers. So maybe there's some pollinators somewhere, and somewhere there are not, some pollinators are not present. So live in a wider range of environments, and they will have a lot of variation. Some may have different root lengths. So that comes to the end of the discussion on the essay questions on section B and C. Please remember one thing: you must use headphones, you must pause the video, and you must look at mark schemes and then understand it from when I'm explaining things to you all. Everybody must be very careful. You must have full attention when you're listening to these videos. Otherwise, you're not going to benefit from them at all. And thank you once again. Please do subscribe and please do comment if there's anything which I can improve.